Welcome to Building My Legacy podcast. This podcast is designed for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy and will provide strategies that focus upon key elements for legacy creation, determining your desired impact and its benefit, increasing your legacy's reach by engaging key stakeholders, planning, prioritizing, and executing. Here's your host, Dr. Lois Sonstegard.
Welcome, everybody, to today's Building My Legacy podcast. I have with me today James Hopkins. James is interesting because he comes to us as an expat, and he does his coaching and consulting primarily with expats at this time. He went to Thailand, and that's where he became interested in the expat life, so to speak. So, James, if you would please tell us a little bit about yourself. He's currently living in Cyprus and married to a Thai woman. And so he's living this multicultural life.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what got you into your work and your background, please.
Absolutely. So you could say multicultural is probably a very good word to use. So basically, in a nutshell, I kind of grew up, the typical kind of life, went to school, did all of that stuff, ended up getting a job, working as a mechanic in a garage. To be completely honest, I knew from a very young age that wasn't the kind of life that I wanted to live. So to cut a long story short, I basically sold some of there was a bit of a personal trauma in my life. I was involved in a car accident and somebody unfortunately passed away when I was about 19 years old, which left me when I was 20 years old with a little bit of a bitter taste for the police and the justice system in the UK, because I kind of got the finger pointed at for this accident, which wasn't my fault, but because of my young age being involved in an accident like this. So without going into too much detail about that, it kind of just left me in a place of, working this job that I didn't want to do. And I wanted to get out, see the world, explore. My family had always lived abroad. I had all of these people in my family my mum actually lived in Africa at that time. And I wanted to get out and see the world. So I basically sold my car, sold all my possessions, jumped on a one-way ticket to Thailand. Had a bit of money in the bank, but, as a 21-year-old, not a huge amount. And pretty quickly, after about 4, 5, 6 months, that started to run quite low. And I realized I was going to have to find a job. I was going to have to find something, to make money without going back to the UK. And that kind of led me into a couple of different jobs, like working in a call center, until somebody who I worked with in a call center introduced me to a platform called Upwork. And this was my real first taste of you can actually, make a living without working for the man, right? And this was, 4 or 5 years ago now. And from there, I basically got into freelancing through Upwork. I did various, freelance gigs, started selling animated explainer videos. That was kind of my first line in. And then I discovered the world of internet marketing, social media marketing, the whole high ticket consultant, coaching and consultant space. And really from there, I was doing this job that I didn't want to do. And I needed to find a way of making a good income. I was making about $500 working in this call center a month. So I was actually spending more money than I was making to actually live there. So I had this real drive to find something. And I didn't know what it was. And it took me quite a lot of searching. But around about 3-4 years ago-ish, I started getting into social media marketing, running adverts like Facebook ads, Google ads, some LinkedIn service as well, for businesses. And I basically kind of morphed into this position of a marketing consultant. By the way, sorry, I live underneath the flight path, so I can't help the aeroplanes. It adds to the expat feel, right? And I basically found my way into a marketing consultant type role, just working for myself, working with other businesses, helping them bring more customers through their door. And at that time, I started hitting some nice numbers. I started making some good money, and other expats around me who were still working these jobs, teaching English, working in a call center, doing the kind of jobs that, most people wouldn't necessarily choose to do if they had an option. They started to notice, right? They started to see the freedom that I had, and, the money I was making, and the lifestyle that I was living. And people just started asking me, like, how are you, how have you built this business? How are you living this kind of life? I'd love to learn, etc. And at that point, I was just recently married. We just had our first and only child, Caesar. My wife's Thai, so we were in Thailand at that point. And people just started asking me, how have you done this? And at that point, I saw an opportunity to create a coaching arm to my business, and to work with a market that really resonates with me. And we have a lot of alignment, people who live abroad who have often been through the same process as me. And then, fast forward a couple of years later, and doing pretty well. now out in Cyprus. So obviously travel, adventure, living abroad, that's obviously a big part of my life as well. But that really takes us up to now, without going too much into it.
So James, when you work with expats, what are their biggest challenges?
Oh, wow. Great question. So typically the type of expat I work with, there's kind of two markets. The first market is a very beginner market. So it's people who have never really, never worked for themselves. They've never had their own business. They're very fresh to entrepreneurship. And that's the Lifestyle Marketeer program. That's who the Lifestyle Marketeer program is for. I also work with my own consulting clients as well, who are typically more established businesses. So let's take expats to mean those people who haven't had a lot of experience running a business. That's typically the market that the Lifestyle Marketeer program is for. Now, they typically have the biggest roadblocks when it comes to mindset, right? This totally unsexy thing that not very many people want to talk about or learn or work on, right? But I'm sure, would you agree, Lois, that like mindset is arguably one of or the most important skills to be aware of and to develop?
It is. Certainly. I also find that there are people who have an imbalance in terms of being able to assess what their abilities are against what can really be used. So sometimes we overvalue what we have and don't have the skills that are really necessary. And then there are those who have incredible skills, but you're right, their mindset holds them back.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest thing with the beginner market expats. Even people living at home who haven't yet started a business and they've never been experienced in doing those kind of things. A lot of it comes down to the way people don't realize the way that they need to think to actually become successful in business, in entrepreneurship. So the vast majority of people that I work with who are starting out from scratch, they don't realize the importance of simple values like exercising, like eating healthily, like being disciplined and having the right daily habits. Those are typically the most important foundational things that expats living abroad struggle with when it comes to starting their own business from scratch.
Think it's more than people who are not expats, or how do you weigh that?
Yeah, or you mean for people who that's the same problem almost for people who are and aren't expats? Is that what
right?
You mean?
So is it more so, do you think, or?
I'd say almost yes, because a lot of expats, people who live abroad, right? There's normally a solid reason why people have moved abroad in the first place. Often it's for an easier way of life. It's to do less work, but have a good kind of standard of living. So it kind of goes as far to say is that not everybody, but a lot of people who have moved abroad, they've often moved abroad to have an easier life. So that when they start coming into entrepreneurship, they want to start their own business. They want to be able to make money on demand. They want to be able to control their time. but getting them to do the things that are required to actually live a life like that. I feel people who live abroad potentially have one more obstacle to overcome than people who are living at home, who are used to working, 10 hours a day. People often who live abroad work less hours than that. Some work longer, but some work less. And typically they've moved there for an easier life. So it's getting people out of that gear where they're just ticking along, they're just cruising, they're making, a little bit of money teaching English and doing these kind of things, but they're trading all of their time in the process. For me, one of the most enjoyable things is helping people shift up into the next gear to start working towards building the business and ultimately their life that they want to build. So that for me is obviously very enjoyable.
So how do people find you, James?
Yeah, how do people find me typically? Well, obviously my kind of main bag is paid advertising, right? A lot of obviously what I do for my clients, as well as what I teach the students in the program, it's all largely revolved around advertising. And particularly my kind of marketing strategy of where people would typically find me, they might be sitting on a beach out in Vietnam, and then along would come me on a YouTube ad introducing what I do and how it works. That's typically where the majority of people come into my sphere. There, as well as I've run a lot of Facebook ads in the past. Paid advertising is really my main bag, and now as of late, I'm really paying attention to the content game, and coming on speaking to lovely people like you, and building up an organic YouTube following that way as well. But those are kind of the main ways that people would typically hear about me. Often not in the US, so I actually have very few clients in the US, given that I'm in Cyprus, and the time zones has just led me to build, a very successful business to this point, working with the Southeast Asian and European market. But that's typically how people would hear about me.
So, James, you talk about how fatherhood really shifted your orientation. Share with us a little bit about what that meant to you and how it shifted you.
Massive. So it's a little bit of one of those cliche, a little bit rags to riches type story, but it's quite a cool story. So basically, just before my son was born, but just before we found out that we were going to be having my son, my business wasn't anything like what it is now. Like, it was, working with a handful of clients, not knowing where the next one was going to come from. But at that time, I only had myself to support. So, I was living in Thailand at that time. I didn't need a lot of money per month to sustain my life. And there wasn't a lot of pressure. But with that lack of pressure came the ticking along, not doing as much as I possibly could, not pushing myself, et cetera, et cetera. And then we actually found out that we were having a son, right? And this came completely out of the blue. We weren't trying, but it happened. And honestly, it's obviously one of the best things that's ever happened to me. My wife is, awesome. We have a great relationship. And that's really helped me in my journey. But my son specifically, when I found out we were having a child, I think anybody who's a parent who is listening to this now will remember the moment where they found out. And the feelings of happiness, but also maybe a little bit of fear come through when you realize that now I'm not going to be the only person that I'm responsible for, and I need to take my business and my career by the horns and really, go hell for leather at it, basically. And that's what happened. So we found out that my son, that we were having a baby, wasn't particularly very, I wasn't doing too badly, but I wasn't as financially stable as I perhaps could have been or wanted to be. And I realized that I didn't want to give my son the life that I was achieving myself. I wanted to be able to give him a life where he grew up in a nice environment, where money wasn't a problem, but not to be too spoiled, right? And that was really the motivator that kicked me from being a kind of a bounce along entrepreneur who makes a few grand a month here and there, to really, building a now multiple 7-figure business, online coaching business, and consulting business. That was really the kickstart. That was the fuel on the fire that I needed. And since then, it's everything thankfully has really gone from strength to strength. But it obviously wasn't easy getting started, right? Like I'm sure everybody can relate to.
So tell me, James, from the time you've been doing this, about 5 years, you said, or 3 years?
In advertising coaching, about 2.5, but I've been in the advertising, digital marketing space for 4 or 5 years in some aspect.
So in the entrepreneurial coaching space, about 3 years. What really, you said advertising pushed your growth. What else would you, if you were talking with somebody about what they needed to do, 3 things that would be keys to really getting an entrepreneurial business off the ground, so it's not just a hobby, but a real business?
Sure. 3 things. So the first one has to be personal development. And when I say personal development, I don't mean going to every Tony Robbins concert as a fanboy or fangirl. I mean reading, spending time to actually read and develop your own understanding of the world and understanding of other people's lessons and views and experiences. But when I say personal development, I'm actually going to go one step further than that as well. The thing that has really driven the needle for motivation for me, which I feel is a massive thing that people first starting out struggle with, right? Motivating, what's your reason why? Working out, having the right daily habits. So for me, that's waking up. I don't particularly wake up early. It's waking up at 7:30, a time where I feel comfortable and want to wake up. It's having a good morning routine. It's having exercise in my daily plan every single day. Meditation and Wim Hof. Have you heard of Wim Hof?
No.
So Wim Hof is he's basically called the Iceman. It's this guy who focuses on meditation and breathing and sits on icebergs and in really cold weather. And it's really cool. Like if anybody, is wondering how they can gain more focus and clarity in their life and become more spiritual and connected to your body, which I feel is something that people, neglect often. Wim Hof, check him out. Really highly recommended. So the first one's personal development. In a variety of ways, not just one, but a healthy combination. The second one has to be focus. So this is one thing that I see particularly in very beginner entrepreneurs. They lack focus. They chase shiny objects, or that's one example of lacking focus. Another example would be they just don't have the clarity of what they're trying to achieve and how they need to achieve it. Right. So focus and clarity is number 2. And the third one kind of ties into focus and clarity. And that's for me is how have I achieved that focus and clarity, personal development on the one hand. But the third one is working with people who are much further ahead of you and learning from their mistakes and their lessons, especially for my market and people who, would typically by, say, the Lifestyle Marketeer program, which is for beginner entrepreneurs, complete startups, is a fear of investing in themselves. And it's a fear of finding somebody who is where they want to be, putting their trust in that person to let them show them the way. Those 3 for me were the biggest realizations now looking back, that like if I could just tell myself several years ago, I would have saved so much time and so much energy trying to figure everything out. Obviously, I've had my fair share of mentors. But yeah, those are my kind of 3 biggest ones.
So if you're going to look for somebody who is a coach or a mentor for you, what characteristics would you look for?
Absolutely. So yeah, another great question. So firstly, there has to be alignment for me. I'm huge on alignment. I believe, working with the types of people that I work with and really focusing and niching down on that particular area. Alignment for me is huge. So when I say alignment, I mean like somebody who shares similar values or I feel a connection with. This is, trying to put it into words. I often only buy myself through coaches and mentors. I've spent a fortune on them. But typically I'm drawn to people who I have alignment with, who I see myself in, who I see where I want to be. And that's the biggest one, right? They've got to have achieved exactly what I'm looking to achieve, or at least the next stage of what I'm looking to achieve. That's got to be the biggest one, because I know that there's so much noise out there. There's so many people saying, oh, do this, do that, and it'll work, and we'll get you 1 million clients and blah, blah, blah in 2 weeks. It becomes very hard to compete unless obviously you've got the right mechanisms for doing so. But I feel like, this term bro marketing, I don't know if you've heard of the term bro marketing. I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine. Yeah, bro marketing. I feel like this is something that's really almost the trend is really picking up. And as there becomes more coaches, more consultants, people have to throw wilder and wilder claims out there. And eventually it gets to a point where those claims are just fictitious. And even in my experience and my journey, over the last few years, I've seen that become more and more prevalent. So I'd kind of recommend anybody who's, thinking of investing in themselves, thinking of investing in a coach or a mentor, that person has to have walked the path that you're trying to walk. I've hired people who have and people who haven't as coaches and mentors. And arguably, almost every single one of them has driven the needle for me, probably because I actually put in the work and I actually do what's needed to get a result. But yeah, that alignment and the fact they've walked the path I now want to walk, that's very important for me.
Okay, so anything else? We've got alignment, have walked the path that you're wanting to walk. Anything else that you think is really key to finding the right fit?
Yeah, for investment's sake, the last one, and it's a bit more of an abstract one, but one that comes to mind is like big thinkers. So I want to be around, and this is my personal preference, right? But again, my advice from the journey that I've walked, the most growth has come for me, I'd say arguably, coaches and mentors one, but arguably the people who I'm around. So if I'm thinking of investing in another coach or mentor, it's very important for me to see that they are big thinkers, right? They want to achieve the max. This just aligns with me and my personality. I guess that's kind of why I look. But with big thinkers often comes big communities. And often they've already got a following. They've already got lots of people who are going to be like-minded to you. So community, again, like a bit of an abstract answer, but community for me, I would seriously consider who I invest with based on their community. Because I know if I work with a coach or a mentor, that the value is not just going to come from working with that coach and mentor. It's going to come from the network that I make of being associated with that person. And that for me is huge. Bit abstract, but that's my answer.
Got it. So big thinker, I think that's an interesting one. And certainly it has received a tremendous amount of attention in the business world in recent years. And there are those who would say that big thinking has to be people that are outside your industry and network as well, because otherwise you're just thinking more of the same. Your experience, thoughts, you work with people who are really outside the box already. So thoughts on that?
Yeah. So do you mean people who I've worked with who are outside the box? People who I've been coached and mentored with who really think outside the box? So the first one, and this is a massive name in the industry, which I'm sure a lot of your following will have heard, but Sam Ovens. So Sam Ovens, I'm sure, like I said, I'm sure lots of people have heard of him. I was in Sam Ovens' program. So well before he ever really became such a huge name. And And at that time, he was an outside of the box thinker. I think now Sam Ovens and consulting.com have done so well that their outside of the box thinking has actually now become an industry norm, which for me is like, mind blowing to see how one person has had such an impact, and their business has literally now impacted a multi-billion-dollar industry, and every man and his dog knows who he is and how he works, right? So for me, the person who I believe was most outside the box at the time was Sam Ovens, and the way in which his philosophy. So there's lots and lots of coaches on consultants that anybody could work with who are basically regurgitating more of the same, right? Whereas with Sam and those type of people ignore the philosophy. They don't want to go into the how things work, in my experience. But for example, Sam Ovens' Consulting Accelerator, which is his very first, program, I think, however much it is, I'm not sure, but the entry level one. In that, he's got a mindset training which literally, changed the way that my brain worked. And at the time, that mindset training, that was completely out of the box. Nobody had ever, not from my experience, nobody had ever put that amount of time and focus on understanding what motivates people, what's going to make people do the work. And the way he broke it down, that for me was the most out of the box, but life-changing learning experience I've ever had personally. So I believe at that time, Sam Ovens was the most out of the box person in the industry. And I think that's why he took over the industry and now became the most inside the box person, because he's taught everybody, taught a hell of a lot of people what he knows. And he's got a hell of a lot of people to where they want to be. Big influence on my life.
Isn't it amazing? We all thrive based on who has come into our lives, who we've let into our lives. But many times we don't choose wisely who those people are. So we listen to voices that really don't push us. We tend to look for comfort rather than people who push. So
absolutely. And on that, people look for somebody who's going to give them comfort. For me, and this just reflects a lot about my coaching style. If there's something that you need to hear, I'll tell you it, because you need to hear it. Often at times people are paying, me or my team, a lot of money to hear the advice. Now, the problem is with that, people don't want to hear what they don't want to hear. And often it's what they don't want to hear that's actually going to drive the needle. So for me, there's a lot of coaches, consultants, people who have had experience working with, most of which have been very positive, but there are some experiences that I've had where people become yes men. And I don't know if you know the term yes men, but like where they literally just tell you what you want to hear, take your money, happy to take your money, and then happy to let you dictate the course of your journey through their program or through their coaching. That for me is not proper coaching. That for me is somebody who wants my money and then wants to tell me what I want to hear and doesn't actually care about the end result that they bring to me or that I achieve. Right. So for me, I would way rather work with somebody who's going to tell me what I don't want to hear, but get me a result, than somebody who is going to tell me what I want to hear and not tell me what I need to do or change to achieve a result, right? I think there's a lot, as the coaching and consulting space gets more and more and more crowded, there's more and more and more people who are happy to take your money, but not give you what is necessary, which is often hard truths to get to where you want to be. Right. That's kind of my take on it.
So James, we are almost out of time. And so before we would close, what things have we not talked about that you're passionate about or you think are really important for people to think about?
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is one that will resonate massively with your market and your audience. And one that has really come into my life recently since moving to Cyprus. And this is having a work-life balance. So I've never been happy. I've been in months where we've hit, 150, 160, 170K a month, and I've not been happy. And I didn't know why. I didn't know why I wasn't happy. And it was because, and I learned this the hard way, it was ultimately because I was chasing numbers. And this is a massive one that I think a lot of people, again, in the high ticket space have been brainwashed to believe that, you need to hit record numbers. You need to hit 200, 300, 500, a million a month. And this has become now almost an industry norm as well, for people to chase these numbers rather than the happiness that actually comes with it. So I almost learned this lesson the hard way. And that was that I got so detached from living life, spending time with my wife and my son. And I actually lost sight of what I enjoy in my own business, because I started chasing numbers. And don't get me wrong, I love hitting targets. I love, hitting records and putting big numbers out there. But I've arguably been way more happier and fulfilled spending more time not working 12 hours a day. And it sounds a ridiculously obvious thing, but I think even when you do 8 or 9 hours a day, often people, have started a business, they want to work for themselves because they want that control. And for me, I lost sight with why I'd started my business, my lifestyle business in the first place. And I just let numbers take over. And that went on for a couple of years. We hit some great numbers and we still hit great numbers. But over the last few months, I've taken more of a step back to go, what do I actually like about the business? Where do I want to spend more time? What gives me fulfillment? Because chasing numbers will do that for a little bit. But when you realize that every time you break a record, it doesn't get any better, it doesn't feel any better, the numbers just get bigger. That for me was one of the biggest lessons that I've now learned, that I've been grateful enough, that I've been lucky enough, and that I'm very grateful for, to be able to do the kind of numbers that we do at 27 years old. So I've been lucky enough to learn that from a very young age, that you don't need to work 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, and pour everything you've got into a business to make however much. It's actually way more important to have a number that gives you a comfortable life. Shoot for that number, push yourself obviously where you need to, but enjoy your life. Like, everybody's in business because they want to have a good life, right? There might be some people outside that box, but the vast majority, they start a business and they hit a C-level exec, CEO, and they wanted to get there for what? Personal fulfillment, financial fulfillment, to give their family a good life. Many people just lose connection once they hit those heights of where they wanted to be. They then get disconnected with why they did it in the first place. That happened to me. If anyone can learn from that experience and that lesson, then that's great.
Yeah, it's true. As soon as we lose sight of what motivates us, what our purpose is, we lose the joy of the work that we're trying to be engaged in.
Yeah.
James, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to talk with you and to learn what you have learned in your journey as you have worked with expats and really developed your own business. And I think many of those principles, as people begin to build their legacy, they're back to looking at what are the foundational pieces that I need to put in place in order to make that happen. Yeah. So Absolutely. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Lois, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for everybody for listening to my story and my journey. I've actually recently started a YouTube channel that I'm now working on, which is going to have a lot of content around mindset, beginner, the building blocks, ultimately getting those in place, so you can actually set yourself up for a career and business that you ultimately want to build. So feel free to check that out. I'm sure you'll drop a link somewhere around this.
Send us the link and we'll put it in the show notes so people can have access to it. Thanks, everybody, to listening to Building My Legacy podcast today.
You've been listening to Building My Legacy podcast with Dr. Lois Sonstegard. To book your appointment with Dr. Sonstegard, visit www.buildtomorrow.com.